saying before the break, sometimes consumer decision making can be very routine, very simple and very simplified. Other times it can be much more complex. Now, the degree of complexity will vary by individual consumers. So it will depend on what level of involvement we have, that is, on what level of risk we see in relation to purchasing a particular product or service. Those 5 types of risk that I referred to. It'll depend on the length of time that we have to make the decision. Is it something we can buy now? Is it something we can delay? Is it something for the future, for future consumption? Is it something that we have a future need for, or we want to use today? The cost, cost, and bear in mind, cost isn't always financial. Now, cost can be time and effort, physical effort, emotional effort, intellectual effort. Of course, the higher the costs, whether it's any of those things, the more complex the decision-making process is likely to be. And of course, the number of alternatives. And typically what you find is through this hierarchy and through the order qualifying, order screening process, is the number of alternatives starts to diminish down. And I mentioned involvement a couple of times. I've just put in another slide. This isn't in your pack, but I was thinking about this at lunchtime, about the issue of involvement. Now, this is a fairly simple slide that captures the idea of involvement, because remember on the previous slide we're saying that your level of involvement will partly determine how complex the decision-making process is. And so your level of involvement, that is how much risk you see associated with it, how much investigation you feel that you need to do, how much uncertainty you need to deal with in buying a particular product, will depend on your level of previous experience, whether you have a lot of interest in buying the particular product or service, or if it's something you think's boring and just want to get it over and done with. This idea of risk, whether there are negative consequences, the purchase situation, once again time and location, and social visibility. Now, from a social perspective, is it a significant purchase? Will it impact the way in which my social group, my social network think about me? Social visibility is an interesting thing. As some of you probably know, there are consulting firms who go around and tell people how they should present themselves on Twitter and LinkedIn. There are firms who go around and tell you what sort of photographs you should have of yourself on LinkedIn, because it's meant to be a professional page. So how do you look professional but still look accessible and approachable and interesting without looking sort of severe and unapproachable? So this idea of social visibility is becoming an important one in an increasingly connected world. I just want to spend a little bit of time. So I've sort of said this is the hierarchy of effects model is a model that's very popular with marketers, and it's very popular because it helps us sort of organise the way in which we're going to approach the market. So we sort of think about it like a funnel. We start off with awareness of an unmet need. We do the interest and comparison. We might try it, then we buy it. So that, in a simple way, is what our hierarchy of effects model looks like. So it's a nice linear process. We start off up there, people go through all this various stages, and they end up down here and buy a product. Well, in fact, the reality is that it's not like that in practice. This is what it looks like in practice. This is women buying a sofa. Now, this is actually research-based. This is based on thousands of interviews, thousands of questionnaires. Let's go back a bit. Women between the ages of 25 and 40, and the way in which they buy sofas. So, in this particular market, the need for a new sofa wasn't because, typically, it wasn't because they were sitting at home saying, gosh, look at this old sofa, it's so worn out and unfashionable, I need to get a new one. It was to do with, I saw it in a print catalogue. So there's some nice styles there, nice fashions there, whatever it might be. So the initial communication, the thing that sort of struck the need awareness, if you like, was print catalogues. Then they, in the majority of cases, they then went to social sites. So why would you go to a social media site? So this is like, Twitter or Facebook, LinkedIn. So they're you and me type sites. It's not the site that sells sofas. It's not the site that makes sofas. Why would you go to the general public first? Yeah, you're interested in customer reviews. So I've looked at this catalogue. I've probably decided there's maybe 10 in there that I'm interested in. I simply go, I can start blogging about it. I can simply put questions on the internet. Who's bought this product? What do you think about it? Are there comparable products? So I can start getting feedback. Why do I get that from other customers? Because I believe them. Because they're credible. Because they've got no reason to lie to me. They've got every reason to be honest. So I'm starting off trying to look for information that I can rely on and trust. And even though these are people's opinions, so they're subjective, they're still trustworthy. It's people giving their honest assessment, their honest opinion. Then people start doing research. So back to the print catalogue, they might use barcodes or QR codes to get additional information using a smartphone or a tablet. They might go to an e-commerce website. So this is still part of all the information gathering. Then they might look at a digital catalogue, or a kiosk, or an iPad. So they're looking online for further information. So these are shopping sites. Having got some information from the shopping sites, they go back to the e-commerce website. So I found out all my information here about the product. Why do I go back to the e-commerce website? I've got all my product information here. By the time I get to here, I've got all my product information. Why am I going back to the e-commerce website? Get the price. Then I go back here, across there, down there. So that's what a typical buying pattern looks like for this particular market, women 25 to 40. Shopping for sofas in this particular instance. So what we've got here, these of course are all channels. Now they're not necessarily channels for products, but they're channels for information. Now the interesting thing about it is the way in which people use different channels, and depending on the product, for example, in this particular case, these women didn't make much use of smartphones, didn't make much use of video content, didn't ring, didn't look at much user-generated content, so didn't go and look at YouTube videos or whatever it might be. Absolutely no television. So if you're in the business of marketing sofas, you've got some channel decisions to make. Bear in mind that lots of things come down channels, not just the product, but information flows down them as well. So in this case, the consumer concerned is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 channels, I think, 6 channels. And in a very non-linear sort of way, they've used information gained at one channel to go back, forwards, up, down, and so on. We're also interested in why they use different channels. What's motivating them? And bear in mind, this is in relation to buying furniture, buying a sofa. So individual consumers would use channels in different ways for different types of products. So we often found people were searching for general information, then they were searching, so I want to find out about sofas. What are sofas made of? Or what types of materials are there? What styles are available? What styles are people buying? What materials are people buying? Who stocks what products? So I'm really just starting off with a very big list of things that I want to find out. Then I want to find out what are the good brands? Who are the reliable brands? Who are the fashion brands? Who are the good value brands? Then I start to think about, well, I want to find some very specific information. So I want to find a sofa that folds down into a bed. I I want to find a sofa that's in a particular size because it's got to go into my TV room that only has a certain amount of space, and so on and so on. Then I want to start comparing products, then I want to compare prices, then I want to find out where to buy it. And of course I can buy it in-store, I can buy it online. So there's a whole lot of information. And then this was a study we did in the US and in America, redeeming offers, that is, cutting offers out of the newspapers, like 10% off if you bring in this advertisement, is very, very popular. So we were interested in this question of channel usage. How do people, and we were interested in more than just, we're interested just in general channel usage, not just in the furniture business, but across a range of different types of products. So we're interested in clothing, we're interested in footwear, we're interested in furniture, we're interested in consumer electronics, we're interested in a range of things. And we found this to be quite interesting, that when people initially become aware of or they're interested in a product, they use print and social media. Then they start looking at brand information. They use an online search engine, so you just go and type it into Google, and they use the manufacturer's website. That in itself, from a consumer behaviour perspective, is quite interesting, because you couldn't get a more general query than punching it into Google. You couldn't get a more specific response than looking at the manufacturer, because what's the manufacturer going to say about their product? They're going to say how good it is. But they'll also give you specifications and things like that. Then when we want to get product information, once again, online search engines, we look at the retailer website and we look at the manufacturer website. I always think it's interesting when you buy things online, you look at the specifications. Quite often the specifications are identical at the online retailer and at the manufacturer site, and quite often they're different. And they tell you different things. They're often complementary. So they're not contradictory, they're complementary, but they give you a much more complete picture of things. So that's what these people are doing. They're going to, who made the product and what have they got to say about it? Who's selling the product and what have they got to say about it? So if you look at those 4 circles there, the consumer has exposed themselves to all of the marketing material. What the manufacturer is saying about their product via print, what they're saying at their website, what the retailer is saying about the product. Then people start looking at social media, shopping comparison sites. So having got all the marketing information from the manufacturer and the retailer, I then want to find out what other consumers have got to say about it. I then go from there to comparing prices, then go and find a store, often using a mobile, and so on and so on. So, why is this important? Well, this is important because if you go back to the hierarchy of effects model, we're saying there are 5 different levels of that, from need awareness through to purchase and post-purchase dissonance. What this tells us is that we need to know where a particular market or a particular market segment is in that model to know how to talk to them. So let's say, for example, we knew that people were at the decision that in a particular market segment, most people in that segment were at the decision-making phase. They had lots of exposure to the product, they knew a lot about it, they're at the decision-making phase. We need to be talking to them through shopping comparison sites and social media. We've gone past the stage where we can influence them by putting more information on our website or doing more advertising. The only way we can influence them is if we find them at social media websites. So we need to understand where they are in the consumer information processing hierarchy to work out how to market to them. And so that, in a sense, is sort of what marketing is about. Targeting the market segment you want, understanding where they are in the buying process, and understanding how to communicate with them at that point. Because can you imagine if you just simply decided, oh look, we think that the way to sell our product is through really heavy in-store promotion. Or, gee, let's go to the newspapers and do a lot of advertising through the newspapers. Or let's have, everywhere you look these days, people are talking about video advertising. Last month, there were 100 billion, that's with a B, 100 billion Video ads served on the internet. 100 billion ads served on the internet. The people we spoke to didn't care less about any of them. So if you were putting your ads out via video advertising on the internet, you're wasting your money and having no influence. So that's essentially all this is telling us. At what point, where are they in the purchase process, and where are they looking for information at each point in the purchase process? So you can sort of group them all together. The crosses are where we thought that the findings were a little bit counterintuitive. We actually expected that people would use shopping comparison sites a lot earlier. We thought mobiles would have a lot more influence early in the process, but essentially they only had a lot of influence in terms of finding a store. We thought video, because it was growing so quickly, would have a lot of influence, and so on and so on. So the crosses are where we expected that particular channel would have a big impact, and it had none. So if you're a marketer, go back to this morning's lecture, we think about customers as being an asset that we want to invest in. And this is about trying to make the right types of investment, that is investing in the right channels with the right information at the right time in the consumer decision-making process. We can only understand that if we know which segment we're after, and how that segment collects and interprets information. And they're just a couple of examples of where some segments had more than had multiple interactions. So, for example, we see that websites are quite important. Online search engine, how you use online search engines, whether you try to lift yourself up the search hierarchy, whether you use advertising on Google's front page, whether you buy AdWords, and all those sorts of things are separate discussions. And this is just some examples of what we found in different industries. So you look at electronics. Manufacturer's website was really important, but clothing and footwear, the retailer's website. So electronics, the manufacturer's website was important all through the buying process. For clothing and footwear, manufacturer, retailer, retailer, manufacturer. Now, if you think about it, there are probably reasons for that. One of the reasons being is you go to the retailer website because you're interested in whether they've got it in stock or not, whether it's available on store and so on. Social media had a very big impact on people's view on electronics. Electronics are a great example of a complex product. And when you buy a smartphone, when you buy a television, when you buy a home theatre system, there are lots of things that we don't understand about them from an engineering perspective. So we need to get information from other people. So that's what we see people doing. So one of the, well, I suppose manufacturers' websites and other consumers are the two biggest sources of influence when buying consumer electronics. Other consumers have very little influence on clothing and footwear. Sorry, other consumers that you find online, because this is about social media and user-generated content. Why would you think that social media and user-generated content wouldn't have as much impact on clothing and footwear? The answer is because your peer group, your friends and your family have much more influence on how you interpret fashions around clothing and footwear. Much less so than social media is has no boundaries. So for all you know, the people who are responding could be people in other countries, people of different ages, people of different tastes. Whereas your family, your peer group. So your social group will have much more influence on clothing and footwear than people via social media. So what we find once again is by looking in this case different product markets, but these are particular segments within the product market, the whole consumer behaviour process is quite different. And unless we understand what that consumer behaviour process is for particular market segments in relation to particular products, then marketing is going to be a very expensive waste of time. So that's why consumer behaviour and understand the search process become so important. So, from a marketing perspective, we do simplify the whole consumer behaviour decision-making process. Because the reality is, we're not all that concerned about how people's brain works. We're more concerned that whatever way their brain works is telling these people, if they want to buy electronics, to go to the social media site. That's what we want to understand. We want to understand the impact, not necessarily the mechanics of how the brain works. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times the issue of segments and understand the right segments. I'm going to do a sort of brief introduction to segmentation now, but I'll talk about this more next Monday. The idea of segmentation is about trying to group together customers with similar needs. So if you want to take the hierarchy of effects model, often they're people at similar stages of the hierarchy of effects model because they're at the point where they have similar needs in the consumer decision-making process. Now, getting customers to, exploring customer needs isn't an easy thing to do for a range of reasons. For example, where we have existing needs, they're often well known in the marketplace and there are plenty of products that already satisfy those needs. Generally in those sorts of markets, there's a lack of innovation, so if you want to grow your market, then you've got to win market share from competitors. The next group are what we call latent needs, needs that are unmet. But often consumers can articulate needs via market research. So that doesn't mean that people will tell you how to meet their needs, but they might be sort of general things like, we'd like to be able to buy healthier food. We'd like to drive safer cars. We'd like to get better access to education. So they're things that people can articulate quite clearly. Some things, of course, consumers aren't able to articulate the need or a solution. And so we often find that there are technological breakthroughs that drive markets. So, for example, I mentioned the other day about the Sony Walkman. No one asked for a Sony Walkman. The Sony Walkman's always used, if you look in textbooks, wherever, come to other lectures from people like me, everyone talks about the Sony Walkman because it's probably the best example ever of a breakthrough technology that no one asked for. And it set in motion a revolution that sort of continues today. So quite often, what was the technological revolution that the Macintosh introduced? You were born, for a few of you. Yeah. What was there about? What could the initial Mac do that no previous PC had been able to do?
I know is that they had the
graphical user interface. Yeah. So we went from having to type everything, all your computer instructions in by hand, to having menus and the GUI, the graphical user interface. So no one said, "Gee, I'd buy a computer if it had a graphical user interface." In fact, very few people said, "I'd buy a computer if they were easy to use." In fact, Thomas Watson, who was a founder of IBM, said he thought that at the time that IBM invented their first computer, that the world market for computers was probably about 5 in total. Bill Gates said he didn't see any need for people to have computers in their home when he founded Microsoft. So no one said we need to have a computer. No one said we need one of those. Oh, the same people who invented graphical user interface invented the mouse. Oops, speaking of. So quite often the technology runs ahead of the consumer's ability to express what they want. So that's a very high risk approach. Very high risk because it means you're investing in technologies and spending resources on technologies for which you're unsure whether there's a consumer market. But often with technologies, you know, if you win one and lose a few, as long as you win one every now and then you make plenty of money. So look at Apple; they've got a couple. So yeah, Apple were the first people to use the graphical user interface. First people to incorporate a mouse into a smaller computer, and all of a sudden there was a market for personal computers. So they're all examples of this unmet and incipient needs. So when the iPod first came out, I just like using the iPod because I think it's an interesting case study, because the iPod was not a first to market product. It wasn't an especially good product. And Apple had had a recent history of some technological disasters. Now, if anyone's interested in the sort of history of technology in Silicon Valley and Apple, look up Apple Lisa and look up Apple Newton. And one of those cost Steve Jobs his job, and it took him another 12 years to get back into the Apple company. But of course, when he did get back, this was his big thing. And you can see this is typical of the sort of feedback that people gave. You know, just what we need: another MP3 player. Steve's mind starting to go. As someone said, you know, where's the Newton? The Newton was a tablet 15, 20 years ago. It was just a complete disaster. It didn't work very well, very heavy, very expensive. You know, $3.99, way too expensive. All this for something so ridiculous. Who cares about an MP3 player? I want something new. I want to think differently. Why would they do this? It's so wrong. It's so stupid. As I said before, the point that all these people have missed is it wasn't about the product. It was about this thing here. Playlists. Be able to buy music and create your own playlists. But no one has said, I want to be able to buy music legally and create my own playlists. Apple just thought about, well, what's the user experience we can create here with the technology as the means to get the experience, not the experience itself. The experience is getting legal music, creating your own playlist. And that was what was different to all of these products. So the iPod was a bit of a combination of a couple of these things. It wasn't clearly one or the other. So, if you sort of think about needs, how does that sort of turn into segmentation? Well, segmentation is the process of dividing a large market into smaller target markets. And we see that all the time. You know, you've only got to walk into a car dealership, and there are different models aimed at different markets. You can go anywhere you like and you'll see examples of segmentation. But often the idea of segmentation is built around the product. So we have large cars, family cars, small cars for single people and students and first drivers, cars for people who are tradesmen, big cars, small cars, medium cars, etc., etc. But this process of segmentation isn't about the product, it's about the customer, not the product. So what are we trying to do when we segment markets? Well, we're really saying we want to understand why different consumers behave differently. If we understand how different consumers behave differently, we can work out how consumers will behave in response to our marketing. That will help us understand which consumers to market to. Increasingly, it's very, very difficult to market to a whole market. So we need to think about how do we compete, how do we select which markets to compete in, and how much do we invest in there? Time, effort, energy. How do we construct our value proposition for those markets? You know, what channels should we use? How should we promote our product? What brands should we use? Because we can't do the same for all markets. We might identify opportunities for repositioning, so if we think our brand needs to improve, we'll talk more about this next Monday, and opportunities for new products. Because if we understand the market, a particular market segment, there's ways in which we can identify the needs of those segments and respond by developing new products and services. Now, the purpose of segmentation is, it sounds a little bit contradictory, but it's both dividing and joining. So I'm dividing by saying I don't want to market to an entire market. I want to market to particular groups in this market. But the people within each of these groups need to be similar. So I want each group to be different to every other group, but I want the people within each group to be similar to one another. Does that make sense? Explain that properly? So we talk about them as being homogeneous within, that is, all the people within the group are similar. Heterogeneous between, so groups are different to one another. No point segmenting groups if we don't think they're going to be profitable. And finally, and this is often the bit that people miss about segments, you've got to be able to market to them. We might be able to describe them, but if we can't find out how to reach them, so they've got to be actionable, they've got to be measurable, they've got to be accessible. So we can't just say, I'm marketing to a segment of people who might like a particular product. Why are we marketing that segment? How will they respond? How will we measure our success? How are we going to market to them? Are the sort of questions that get asked. When we say that they're homogeneous within, that is similar within, they're homogeneous, they might all look different. They might all have different incomes. They might all have different ages. They might be demographically, geographically, socioeconomically, culturally different. What we're looking for is people who will respond to our marketing in the same way. And that's the important difference. Segmentation isn't just about putting people into groups. All women under 25, all men under 25, all women over 25, etc., etc. What we're saying is when we market to these people within this group, we expect that they will respond in the same way to our marketing. And they will respond in a different way to other groups. So that's what we mean by homogeneous versus heterogeneous. So when we think about effective segmentation, I mean, segments can look a little bit like this, and this is taking a very simplistic view in a market where we're saying there are two dimensions for segmenting markets. One is some people are concerned about status, some people are concerned about the reliability of the product, the dependability of the product. And so we can see that there are some people who are very high in status, low on dependability. Let me ask you a really simple question. If we said there's a group here called B, Group B, and we know that status is pretty important to them, but dependability is not. Would we market differently to them, to this group who say, we don't care less about status, we're much more concerned about reliability? Absolutely we would. We wouldn't be saying to these people, this is a marvellous brand that Brad Pitt likes. We'd be saying to these people, university tests show that compared to competitors, this is the best product in the world. Or our own crash tests have shown. So this would all be about explaining why, giving logical and rational reasons why the product is dependable. This would be all about explaining why movie stars plus Tiger Woods and Roger Federer and David Beckham like this particular product. If I was going to market to people who liked reliability, dependability, do you think they'd go to the same places for information as people who are interested in status? Would they read the same magazines? Probably not. Will they go to the same websites? Probably not. When they went to my website, would they look for the same information? Probably not. So we see that we would need to market to these two groups. I'm using the two that are most different. We'd have to market those groups quite differently. Sometimes the differences between segments, I mean, from a position point of view, that's not a big gap. But in terms of what you can say in your marketing initiatives, which we're going to talk about more over the next week or so, there's quite a big difference between what you can say to Group A versus Group B. So, in a simple sense, that's why we segment the whole market. So, if we decide that, well, we need to get a balance between the segment between status and dependability. So all of our messages and all of our product positioning will be around a mixture of status and dependability, who would we market to? Nobody. So we need to understand where the consumers are. Not what we think about our product, not what we think consumers want, but understand the differences between them. So, understand the similarities between them if they're in the same segment, and the differences between them if they're in different segments. And of course, we also want to understand the profitability of different segments. Let me give you an example. If we were a bank, and we went through all the different segments of a bank, so banks have private customers, they have manufacturing customers, they have institutional customers, they have corporate customers, they have agricultural customers. Who do you think would be the least profitable group for most banks? They're retail customers. People like you and me are the least profitable market for most banks. And yet, we make up about 40% of the money that most banks have available to lend out to their other customers. So we may not be profitable as a segment, but banks need our money so they can loan it out and make money. But for most banks, we actually fall, private buyers, private consumers, fall into that segment that's unprofitable. But they understand the relationship between the consumer segment and the business segment. If they understand it, then they can work with it. If they simply said, oh, look at those consumer segments, they're unprofitable, let's become a specialist in commercial banking, they wouldn't have a business. So these interrelationships can be important as well. Okay, I think that might do us for today. I'll send around information about the case studies and the revised time for the assignment later on today or tomorrow morning. Okay? If anyone's got any questions, shoot me an email. Otherwise, I'll see you next week.
Colin, just a quick question. When you talk about fragmentation, is that going into a niche market?